Okay. Today is Thursday, November 2nd, 2017. My name is Edna Sussman. I'm a reference librarian here at the Half Hollow Hills Community Library. We're interviewing Carl L. Peters, a Vietnam Army veteran, as part of our Veterans Testimonial Project and in collaboration with the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project. Thank you so much, Carl, for your service and for participating in our project today.
You're welcome, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Carl, where and when were you born?
I was born in 1949 in Brooklyn, New York. The whole world came from Brooklyn.
Right. And who were your parents, their names, and what did they do?
My father was George Nicholas Peters, and he was a World War II Marine. And my mother was Helen Grace Hudson, and she was a Southern girl in North Carolina. And he was stationed down in Camp Lejeune. They met, and they got married. And they say that was the reason for D-Day.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's great. Wait, so what did he do for a living after the service?
Well, after he came back from overseas,
He was stationed overseas?
he was in Guadalcanal as a Marine. And after the war, when he came back, he was there quite a while. He came back and he worked as a New York City policeman for a while. Then we moved out to the island and he worked for Grumman Aerospace.
Oh, wow. And your mom was a...
My mom was a housewife most of her life.
So did you have any siblings?
A sister Jane, younger, a younger brother George, an older brother Gary, who was also in the military.
Oh, at the same time as you?
He was in the military at the same time as me, and when he was in Vietnam and leaving Vietnam to come home, when his tour of duty was over, I was going in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But he was killed at 27, shortly thereafter returning. He was in Spain vacationing, and he was killed in a motorcycle accident.
Oh, awful sad. Sorry. How did your parents feel about both of you back in one?
Well, they worried.
Yeah.
They were worried. One was coming out, one was going in. But my father was a Marine, and we always felt that, you have to do your duty. It's your country, you do your duty.
Nice. So that was the only sibling that served?
Yes.
In the military, okay. So what were you doing before you entered the service?
I graduated General Douglas MacArthur High School on Long Island. Wasn't ready to go to college.
Where was that on Long Island?
Right on Wantaw Avenue.
Is that Wantagh?
No, it's not Wantaw. I think it's actually part of Levittown.
Okay.
Okay. And when I graduated high school, I wasn't ready to go to college. And I haphazardly found my way into Grumman Aerospace. And I started as a 18, 19-year-old riveting airplanes.
They taught you how to do that, I guess.
They taught me how to do it.
Huh. So, you enlisted or were you drafted?
I was drafted in 1969, and I spent, after being drafted, I spent about 6 months in Georgia. I was training for aircrew for assault helicopters.
To fly them?
Aircrew. I was crew chief. I was being trained to be a crew chief, to crew the helicopter. A crew chief learns to fly. They teach them how to fly, but especially in combat conditions. But to make a long story short, I had to go to Fort Stewart, Georgia, and I was trained there for 6 months on how to crew a helicopter, a UH-1 helicopter.
Now, why did you pick the Army?
I didn't pick the Army. The Army
They
picked me.
drafted you.
They
right.
drafted me.
So did you have the option to go into a different branch or not at that point?
Well, I wasn't looking to join the military. I knew that at that point, because everybody was getting drafted, that eventually I was going to get drafted, and I did. I was working in an aerospace company, but still, that didn't exempt me from duty, so I went in.
Do you think that's why they gave you the helicopter field?
That's exactly why.
Oh.
Because when I went into, when I first initially got started, you do a whole lot of interviews, and they try to figure out who you are, your health conditions, your knowledge, your education level.
When they draft you, you mean?
When you're drafted.
Okay.
What your experience is, so that they can pigeonhole you where they think you're best suited.
Okay.
I didn't want to be in the infantry, so I talked a lot about my work at Grumman, not knowing where I would end up. But after basic training, we all get our orders for where we're going to end up in the military. And I got assigned to Fort Stewart Army Airfield Base out in Georgia, and it was aviation. I was happy as could be.
Sure. What did they expect you to do I mean, were you fixing or?
No, what I was learning to do was understand, what they were teaching me was the systems and everything about the helicopter, okay? The crew chief is the guy in charge of the helicopter. You got a pilot, you got a co-pilot, and you got a crew chief.
Okay.
The pilot flies. The co-pilot's the backup for the pilot. The crew chief knows the airplane. He understands systems. He understands how it operates. He understands how to fix it in an emergency if something goes wrong. He knows who to pull in maintenance when it needs repair or service. He's really responsible for the physical condition of the airplane.
Okay.
That's number one. And also in Vietnam, in a combat situation, he flies with the aircraft as aircrew. And being part of the aircrew, they teach you how to fly, because in the event the pilot gets hit, we take him out of the seat, the co-pilot takes over. There's only, now he's flying. If nobody else knows how to fly, and if the co-pilot gets hit, you're going in.
Oh, wow.
So they teach the crew chief how to fly. So I got a lot of flying experience in Vietnam. I flew
did?
quite a bit, yeah.
Well, because someone was injured or because?
No, because every time I went up, the pilot said, "Hey, Pete," because they call me Pete, Carl Peters.
Okay.
I think it's time for you to take the stick, so jump in the seat. So I'd get in the seat, and he'd let me fly, and he'd teach me, and he'd show me.
Just for experience.
For
to learn.
experience, so that if in the event there was an emergency, I had the
That's
experience to bring the helicopter home.
Very smart. What were these helicopters supposed to do?
Well, anybody that watches movies about Vietnam sees the helicopters in Vietnam. They did everything. The helicopter in Vietnam was the taxi cab, or the pickup truck, if you will, of Vietnam. It took troops out to the field. It went in and pulled troops out that were in trouble. It took food out to troops. It moved supplies around. It did anything and everything it had to do to support the mission.
Wow.
So that's what it was. It was the vehicle for mobility.
I'm getting ahead of ourselves now. So what happened when you departed for training camp and during your early days of training? How was the training? You said it was 6 months?
It was really very interesting, because I came out of basic training, and most of the guys in my company got orders for the infantry. And I'm thinking, oh boy, I hope, I'm waiting for my orders. Where am I going? And I got my orders, and it says I'm going to Georgia, to Fort Stewart, Georgia, to an aviation battalion. Okay, and I said, oh boy, that sounds great. So I got there. After basic training, they give you some time off. You get a couple of weeks, 3 weeks off, and then you go to your next assignment. So I flew to Georgia. I got to Fort Stewart, Georgia. And because I showed a lot of history of being around aviation, they put me right into a live training company where they were teaching pilots how to fly.
Great.
And I remember the first day there, my sergeant said, I showed up and he said, "Okay, Carl, let me show you, take you out where our helicopters are, and let me show you the flight line and take you around." And I'm walking around with him, and he's kind of showing me where the cafeteria is and where the hangars are, and where the flight line is. And then all of a sudden somebody came up to him and said, "Hey," he had to talk to the sergeant. And the sergeant stops talking to him, says to me, "Carl, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to go out to the third line of helicopters out there to tail number 126. There's a pilot out there. He's going on a test flight. I want you to launch the airplane with him."
Oh, God.
So now he thought I was experienced because of my background. Okay. So I ran out there, and it was a warrant officer. He was getting ready to start the aircraft. And he said to me, "Are you the crew chief?" And I said, "I'm not." I said, "This is my first day. I've never seen a helicopter in my life." He said, "Not to worry." He says, "I'm new also."
Oh, gee.
So, make a long story short, he told me and showed me how to untie the rotor blades on the helicopter. He told me that he was going to start the engines on the helicopter, and he wanted me to take the fire extinguisher and look in the engine compartment to make sure there was no fire.
Why would there be a fire?
It's just a precaution. So I'm scared to death.
Oh, sure.
This thing starts running, and it's screaming, and I'm standing there, and it's shaking, and I'm peeking in this little thing. And there was no fire, so I came back, and he showed me how to put very nice guy, nice pilot. He showed me how to put the fire extinguisher back in its case, and he waves to me, "Get in." And I said, "Get in?" He said, "Get in." So I jumped in the back.
Okay.
And then he's sitting in the front. There's pilot, co-pilot seat, and he motions to me to come get in the other seat.
It was just the two of you on the
Just the
vehicle?
two of us. He motions to me to get in the other seat, pilot seat. And I said, "Are you kidding me? This is my first day. This is scary."
Yeah.
So I got in. He helped me strap in, got a headset on me, hooked me up so I could communicate with him, and we took off. And we flew.
Was he an experienced pilot?
He said he was new.
Yeah, well, was
New meant he could have been flying, he may have had 10 hours of flight time, I don't know. But anyway, that hooked me.
Oh, you liked it?
I was, at that point I said, that's all I want to do in my life. I want to fly helicopters, that's all I want to do. So we flew. This is my first day on the job,
Yeah.
right? I come back.
Where did you go?
Fort Stewart, Georgia is in the middle of a very wooded area in Georgia, and it's a training area for pilots.
Oh.
And he flew over areas, and he did certain maneuvers and tests and things on the helicopter to make sure everything was okay, because it had just come out of maintenance. So, and as he's doing these things, he's telling me what he's doing and why he's doing them and all. It was the most interesting thing that ever happened to me in my life.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is amazing. We came back. I went to find my sergeant, and he said, "Where were you?" And I said, "I was flying with warrant officer so-and-so." "Oh, boy, okay, great, so come on, I'll show you where the cafeteria is."
Oh, God.
That was my first day.
Wow, unbelievable. That was after basic training.
That was after basic training.
How was the basic training? How did?
Basic training was basic training. You exercise every day, you run every day, you learn what to eat, what not to eat, you learned military protocol. It was, and it was pretty tough. It wasn't easy. I was very thin, didn't have an ounce of fat on me, I was a relatively healthy guy.
You're like 20 years old?
Yeah, I was very young, and but it was not easy. It was very difficult. It was, the physical part of it was very difficult. They'd wake you up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and you'd go on a 10-mile march, And I don't mean a simple, just easy, casual march. They'd set the pace, and you'd have to keep up with them, and it would be difficult. But it was good. It was interesting.
How long was that?
Basic training, I think, was 8 weeks, I believe. I think it was 8 weeks.
So that wasn't Georgia. Where was that?
That was in Fort Jackson, South Carolina.
South Carolina.
Right.
Okay. Do you recall your instructors in basic training? What were they like?
I remember that my platoon sergeant, he was from the islands. I believe he was from Jamaica. He was a big, burly guy, and he had no expression on his face, okay? He was just a tough guy, right? You didn't know whether he liked you, cared for you, didn't care for you, had no idea. Just do what you have to do.
Okay.
But then I remember when I graduated basic training, I was in the barracks, and he called me over into his room, and it's the only time I ever saw any emotion at all. And he put his arm on my shoulder, and he says, "You're going to be going to Vietnam." He said, "This is the time for Vietnam." He said, "Most of you guys will all go to Vietnam." And he said, "Just keep your nose clean, do a good job, and come home." That's the first time he ever showed anything. I thought that was pretty
That's
interesting.
very nice, too.
Yeah.
How did you adjust to the physical regimen and the food and the barracks and all that?
When I was in basic training, the barracks we stayed in were actually World War II barracks.
Oh.
They were World War II barracks. That's where we stayed. The food was never enough.
No.
It was never enough. I'm not a picky eater, so I ate everything, and I got to, I wouldn't say loved, but I got used to the Army diet, okay? But it was just never enough for me, It was,
You must have liked it. It's okay.
it was okay. It was okay. It wasn't bad.
So then you went to the specialized training for the flight,
For aviation.
aviation.
They
yeah.
put me in an aviation battalion. They sent me to Fort Stewart to learn about helicopters. They thought, because of my background was in commercial aviation, that I was suitable, so I went there. And I spent, I'm going to say, another 6 months training on the Bell helicopters.
That's a long training period.
Yeah, it was. But it wasn't school type of training.
Yeah.
It was hands-on.
Yeah.
Flights, get your helmet on, you're going to go on a flight with us. You're going to see what it's all about, you know. It was pretty interesting.
Very interesting, yeah. So then, after 6 months of that, you were deployed right away
To Vietnam.
to Vietnam?
They sent me home for a while.
Oh.
And then off to Vietnam. My brother was just coming out of Vietnam. So, you know, I had heard stories and, you know, I had seen pictures. And I was a little frightened.
Sure.
You know, I'm thinking, you know, I don't know what to expect. The fortunate thing is that I had to go in, I believe it was Fort Dix, New Jersey. They told me to report to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and from there they'll get me over
Okay, by plane?
by plane. So I reported to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and I'm online, and there's a whole bunch of other soldiers coming in, reporting in for wherever they were going. And the guy in front of me was a guy who was my best friend in high school.
No.
Yeah. And he was in Vietnam, and he was coming back, and he was going back. And I met him going back. So we sat next to each other on the airplane. He told me
Nice.
all about it and, you know, what to
That's
expect, and because I was a little nervous.
Sure. Wow. So, were they planning to send you? What?
Well, they were ultimately where I was going to end up. This is another interesting story. Was the 101st Airborne Division up in the Northern I Corps of Vietnam, and the the Northern I Corps is right by the DMZ, the demilitarized zone. It's the dividing line between the north and the south of Vietnam. And I was going to ultimately end up there, but I didn't know that. They just tell you to get on this bus, okay, and you're
From the airplane?
Yeah, from the airplane. And I'll never forget when the airplane landed, commercial airplane, 20 hours of flight time. You're in the airplane 20 hours. When the airplane landed, they told us, you can't get off right away. We've got to clear the airplane, make sure everything is safe. We'll open the doors so we get some circulation. It'll probably be about 20 minutes before we can unload you guys. But I remember when them opening the door, you get a very distinct smell. This is the first impression I had of like humidity, jungle, the humidity. It just permeated the airplane.
What time of year was it? Do you remember?
It had to be summer because it was pretty warm.
Very hot.
Yeah, it was hot.
And humid.
And you got this smell of humid, almost like clothes smell if they're in a locker or something in a humid area.
yeah.
And I remember when my brother would come home with his clothes, I smelled that smell.
kidding.
So right away I did the association. I said, gee, this is Vietnam. It really,
That's interesting, yeah.
yeah.
So then, once you,
So I had to spend a night in an area called Bien Hoa. I landed in Bien Hoa. That's in the closer to Saigon than up north. It was further south. I spent a night in Bien Hoa, and it was really funny because hundreds of troops are coming in, and
you didn't stay, your friend wasn't together?
no, he had to go somewhere else. He was so I was in Bien Hoa by myself, and when I landed there, they put us in a bus. They drove us through the city, and it was really kind of scary because it was like a school bus, but it had wire and screening on the windows so nobody could throw anything in there. And to get to the base called Bien Hoa, the air base, you had to go through the city of Bien Hoa. And this was like a National Geographic magazine to me. This was the most interesting thing I ever saw in my life. You know, I'm all eyes looking out the window.
Yeah.
We get to the base, and they checked me in, and they said, okay, we're going to take you and give you a place to sleep tonight. Tomorrow morning, come back out here, line up, and we'll be reading off all the names of the guys and where they're going, and we'll tell you what line to get on so that you can go to your next destination. That's all you know. So you got your duffel bag, and so they take me into a barracks, and the barracks had a whole bunch of bunk beds, metal bunk beds, Army military bunk beds. They didn't have mattresses on them. They were just springs, And they said, grab a bunk bed and I'll see you in the morning.
Wait, sleeping on the springs?
Sleeping on the springs. So I took my duffel bag, I took some things out, put it behind my head, and I was in this barracks with a whole bunch of other people that I didn't know. And I'm laying there, and what I'll never forget was I'm laying there, and they left the lights on all night, but I could hear gunfire. I heard gunfire and like grenades and I'm thinking, I don't know what that is. Is that a battle going on right outside my, or what is that?
It wasn't a tent, it was a building?
No, it was a building. It was a wood, we used to call them hooches. It was a wooden building with a tin roof,
How many guys in there?
Well, this one was this must have had 30, 40 people in it, right? But I heard all night, I could hear gunfire. And I'm thinking, are they out there keeping the bad guys from getting me? I had no idea.
Right.
Night passed, got up,
Could you sleep?
not well.
Yeah.
Got up, went to the line where they told me to report, and I'm there, and there's a guy on a podium, and there's 800 GIs there, and they're reading names off. And when they read your name, they'll tell you, get on line 73 or line 21 or whatever, and that'll determine where you're going next.
Okay.
First day, nothing. My name wasn't called. So it's back in the hooch that night, and I slept there again. Next day, I'm out online early in the morning, like 5:30 in the morning, and they read my name off, and they said, get on line, whatever it was, and I was going to Camp Evans, 101st Airborne Camp Evans up in the Northern I Corps. Well, I didn't know what that meant. So I got online, and as all the names, more people got on it, and then they said, okay, everybody on this line, get on the back of that truck. It was a big military open truck. We all got on with our duffel bags, and we started the ride from Benoit all the way up Highway 1, which is the main highway north and south in Vietnam, and in a truck, not an entourage, but
Convoy?
a convoy with helicopters flying with it.
To protect.
To protect. We traveled all the way up through to the north to Camp Evans. And you went through small towns and small villages, and I was totally amazed.
Not scared? Amazed.
At that point, I felt like I was part of a National Geographic, tour or something. I mean, it was like, because all I saw of these kind of countries are what I saw in National Geographic magazines. It was green, it was lush, it was little Vietnamese women walking around with the straw hats and working the rice paddies, and it was the most interesting thing to me. I mean, I just loved it. I thought it was great. And then after traveling a whole day and maybe a half, we got to Camp Evans. And that was a camp, that was a small compound just south of the DMZ. And it was the home of the 101st Airborne. What was interesting about that was the 101st Airborne is a parachute
That's what I thought.
paratroopers,
Yep.
okay? Well, paratroopers in the Army, you don't have to be a paratrooper, that's volunteer.
Oh,
And all of a sudden, I'm in this group, and I'm thinking, I'm not a paratrooper, right? And they said, that's all right, but you're in the 101st Airborne, so you're gonna have to learn how to be a 101st, and the 101st Airborne is one of the most strapped outfits in the Army, like the Green Berets, they're very
Elite. Okay.
And you're in the 101st Airborne, so you're gonna have to learn how to be, the 101st Airborne soldier. I said, oh, okay,
You
fine.
mean learn to parachute?
Learn not to parachute, to rappel, all of that. And I said, hey, guys, they put me in here. I'm supposed to be in aviation. And you are in aviation, but you're in the 101st Airborne Division, and you're in the aviation section. So they wanted me to jump out of helicopters, and they wanted me to rappel off of towers. And I said, guys, that's not me.
What do you mean repel off towers?
Well, you ever see people, they go to the top of a tower or up to a rock wall
Okay.
with the ropes around them, and they come back down backwards as
Yeah.
they repel
Oh, okay.
to get back down to the ground. Got to learn how to do that. I said, that's not me, guys. I didn't join this group. You guys put me in here. My background's aviation. So anyway, I never had to do it. They didn't force me to do
Oh,
it, which was
nice.
luck. I was lucky.
Yeah.
And then they said, okay, you're going to spend a couple days here getting oriented to Vietnam. And the scary part was, that was during Tet of 1969. Tet of 1968 was the major offensive by the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army against the Americans. That was probably the biggest battle, was Tet of 1968, where they tried to take the city of Hue and the imperial city. It was a very well-planned attack by the Viet Cong and the NVA, the National Vietnamese Army. And we ended up beating them back, okay? But it was a really big battle.
You weren't there yet.
I wasn't there yet. I got there the following year, Tet of 69. So when I got there, they said, this is Tet of 69, we're expecting another attack. You know, we're expecting the same thing that happened last year, so we have to get you to know what Vietnam's all about, get you comfortable, but you have to be alert at all times. So I stayed a week there at Camp Evans, and they took us out in the woods, in the jungle, showed us how to follow trails, what to watch out for, look for booby traps, watch out for hand grenade. You know, they taught us, you know, the general. They took us out, gave us rifles. We did shooting again, get us, you know, back into military life.
You had learned that in basic?
You learn that in basic.
Okay.
But when I was in my training,
yeah.
aviation training, you're away from that stuff. So they got you re-indoctrinated. And that's what I did in Camp Evans. And I was there for about a week. Then after that, they said, okay, now you're going to Camp Eagle. I'm sorry. I was in Camp Eagle.
Okay.
And then you're going to Camp Evans. I had to reverse. So they put me on a truck again, and they trucked me about another 30, 40 miles north to Camp Evans, which was a very small compound just south of the DMZ. And it was mostly all 101st Airborne. And there were aviation groups there, and there were artillery groups there. And I spent 6 months there. 6 months, 5 months, I'm not exactly sure, close to it. And then they moved me back south to Phu or near the city of Hue, and they put me into a different company, a Cobra company, Cobra helicopters.
Oh.
And I spent the rest of my duration in Vietnam in the Cobra outfit.
Were they different than what you learned on?
Yeah, and I had to learn on those also. Most of my training and my flight time was on Bell helicopters. Those were the cargo ships that you see all the time when you see the movies. And then they moved me to a Cobra outfit. A Cobra is just a two-man helicopter. It's a gunship. They're very narrow, and it's a mean piece of equipment, and it's used to hunt out the enemy on the ground and take them out. And so you didn't fly with that helicopter.
What do you mean?
Well, that was only a two-seater helicopter. You had a pilot and a co-pilot. Well, you actually had a pilot and a weapons officer, okay? And they were one in front of the other. It's a very small, narrow helicopter, and the air crew sits one in front of the other. There's no room for a crew chief or any other air crew.
Okay.
So I got transferred to that outfit, and then I became a crew chief on one of those helicopters. You had the same responsibilities, but you didn't fly with it.
Oh.
You didn't have to fly with it. You couldn't fly with it,
There's
okay?
not enough space.
Not enough
Just two
space.
people, okay.
But I'd go on test flights on my helicopter, you know, maintenance runs and things like that. And that's where I finished up my tour in Vietnam. I was in Camp Evans.
How long?
I'm sorry, I was down in Phu Bai in a Cobra outfit.
How long total were you in Vietnam?
Just about a year,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you were basically, everything is a front line there, as from my understanding. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, there's, even the
No
rear.
place is safe.
No, even the rear jobs, like you might not, like I was in aviation, you flew in helicopters, but there were cooks, okay? But you're still on a compound and you're still subject to mortar attacks and rocket attacks.
Did
And
that happen when you were?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh, so
yeah.
They like bombed your barracks and things like that?
Yeah, they would try to bomb the compound, you know, at night. They would, or they'd try to sneak in to the compound, you know, through the barbed wire.
Oh.
So we all had to do guard duty, everybody. I don't care what rank you were. Everybody did guard duty, you know, and you didn't do it every night, but you might once every 2 weeks, you might get guard duty at night, and you had to, you know, pull your guard duty. But I remember when I was in Camp Evans one night laying in the bunk, maybe 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and a blast, a big, and I had not experienced that before. And the other guys jumped up and says, it's a rocket attack.
Oh, God.
So you grab your gun, you grab your helmet, and you run out, and just outside your hooch, sleeping area, there's a shelter that was built, sandbag shelter, and you get in there, and you get yourself ready for if somebody's coming in, an attack.
How many people fit in that shelter?
10, 12.
Oh,
you know.
okay.
And you just hope that, you get through it. But it was, they lobbed rockets in on us, but they didn't come try to infiltrate the compound.
The rockets came from the sky?
Yeah, they come from the sky. They may be out in rice paddies or behind a hill or something, under the cover of night, and they'll launch these things into the compound.
Wow. Did any guys get hit?
In that attack, nobody, not that I know of. I don't know of anybody getting hit. They miss a lot of times.
Really?
Yeah.
Someone had mentioned to me that sometimes you get villagers that come and help and work on the...
Yeah, almost
you
every
get that?
compound. Yes, I did. And I'll tell you a story that, I don't know if I should say this, but it's a true story. I was used to military in the United States. And I
From
got...
your dad, you mean? Or
Excuse me?
From your dad, or?
No, I was used to, my military experience was here in the United States.
Oh, I see.
So getting to Vietnam, it's different
got it.
rules, okay?
Yeah.
Different things. So I got there and they said, okay, now, if you have to go to the bathroom, there it is out there. And I said, there it is out there? And I looked at it, and it's a wooden shack that they built. And they said, that's where you go to the bathroom. And I said, I'm not sure, I'm not comfortable with this. And
Yeah.
this is kind of weird, right? So I just refused, and then finally I said, I'm going to have to go. So I'm watching to make sure that there's nobody in this little shack. So I make a beeline for the shack, and I'm in there, and all of a sudden I see little feet walking outside, because you can see those screening,
Okay.
keep ventilation.
Yeah.
And I see these little feet going by. And I'm thinking, okay, I don't know what that's all about. But then all of a sudden, a Vietnamese girl, they call her mama son or girl son, comes in. And she sees me.
Yeah.
She didn't blink an eye. And you're sitting on this long board, and there's a hole, there's a hole, there's a hole, there's a hole.
Oh, so it's a fairly large...
Yeah.
bathroom.
And she got on
Oh,
about, 5 6 holes down, took care of her business, and she was gone. Well, I mean, this is cultural shock.
of course.
I mean, I wasn't used to this.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
How old do you think? A girl?
oh yeah, I'm going to say maybe she was 15, 17, I don't
Jeez.
know, But their culture's different.
Yeah.
And I grew up on Long Island,
How do you know if these are friendly or not? How do you know if they're...
Well, I wouldn't know, but they don't get on the base unless they're checked out.
Really?
Yeah, and I guess the MPs or the security groups, they check them out, what village are you from, what family you're from,
Oh, yeah.
and all of that. And they're watched. They're not just let free to do
Oh,
whatever
okay.
they want.
Because, did you get into town at all?
I got into town quite often, yeah. Whenever I had a weekend or we weren't flying or we had some downtime, we tried to go to the PX, and the PX was out in town.
Oh, how
So
did you
we'd
get
go-
there? Jeep or?
We'd a Jeep, a truck, or we'd hitchhike down Highway 1. We'd take our weapon, we'd hitchhike, and the military was always running up and down. So, a
So you
military
felt
truck.
kind of protected.
Yeah, and they'd pick you up and take you.
What'd you do in town?
What did we do in town? You bought souvenirs, you drank beer, you didn't do a heck of a lot. There wasn't a lot to do,
Really?
But you could see, you took a lot of pictures. I took a lot of pictures.
you?
Took a lot of pictures.
Did you feel comfortable eating in town?
No, I was careful not to eat
Why is that?
because you see the way they live, It's just different.
Yeah.
You don't want, you're smart enough to say, I'm not going to, the restaurant doesn't look like anything that you and I would recognize as a restaurant.
Right, right. So you ate on base all the time?
I ate on the base all
Pretty
the
much
time.
safer.
Yeah.
What were your duties actually while you were on there?
In Vietnam, my duty was, I was assigned to a helicopter. Okay, tail number, let's say 123, that's your helicopter. You got to make sure that helicopter is ready to fly at all times. And that doesn't mean I'm fixing things, but if I saw a hydraulic problem or if I saw an electrical problem, I called the radio shop or I called the hydraulic shop. My airplane needs this, my airplane needs. I had to make sure the airplane was always ready to fly.
So every time it came back from a mission, say, you checked, had to check it out?
Had to check it, we had to examine it, do a post-flight inspection, a pre-flight inspection before the airplane takes off, make sure everything is right, and then I had to fly with it. I had to go with it. So that was basically my responsibility, was to make sure that the airplane was ready to go, and then go with it. And then as a crew chief, you man a machine gun. One side
On the helicopter.
of the helicopter. One side is the crew chief, the other side is a gunner. That is, he's usually a lower ranking guy that just mans a machine gun.
So when it was flying, you had to shoot?
We had to shoot, yeah.
Wow.
You've probably seen pictures of the helicopters
Yeah.
with the machine guns off the
Sticking out.
side. Yeah.
Wow. Were you ever hit?
I was shot myself.
You or the helicopter?
The helicopter many times, but I was never hit myself. I had a pilot once that was shot, and he was killed
Oh, while you were in the plane with
while
him?
we were flying, and we took him out of the seat. I jumped in his seat because that's the routine. I got in his seat, and the co-pilot, we flew us back, and when we got there, he was dead. He had taken a round that missed his flak vest, his
Yeah.
bulletproof vest, and went right through his heart, so it just immediately killed him.
Instant?
Yeah,
Wow. Were you ever injured?
I was never injured.
When a helicopter gets hit, it still is able to fly?
It depends on where it's hit,
Oh,
how badly it's damaged, where it's damaged. You can get hit and you're going in real quick, and then there are other times.
you mean going down?
Yeah, and there are other times you get hit, and if it's not in a vital area of the helicopter, the pilot may be able to bring it back or put it down gently or safely. The pilot.
Can that be fixed if a helicopter is hit?
Oh yeah, they were hit all the time. When I'd come home at night in the evenings, when we'd land after all our flights during the day, my job was to inspect the airplane, make sure everything was okay and it was ready, for flight in the morning. So many times you'd walk around the helicopter inspecting things, and you'd find bullet holes. Okay, now you're flying. You don't hear the gunshots.
Really?
You can't hear them because you're flying. The propeller, the props, the rotors.
Right.
It's all very, very loud, and you got a helmet on. So you don't hear, you don't sometimes even know you're getting shot at. But sometimes you'd come home at night and you'd find holes in the rotor blades, you'd find holes in the tail boom, you'd find holes in the belly of the helicopter. And then you realize,
Wow. But they must have been built pretty well so that you guys didn't get always hurt when that happened.
Yeah, well, if you didn't get hit by a round, you're okay. I mean, and one small round could put the helicopter down if it hit a vital area, or it could do no damage, just come up through the floorboard.
Oh, I see. How did you feel when you were witnessing these casualties and destruction? How did you feel when that happened?
Well, I was young. I think, how did I feel? Scared.
Yeah.
I was scared because you wanted to go home, but not scared to the point where you didn't do what you had to do. You know what I'm saying? You didn't crawl in a corner.
It's just automatic, I guess.
That's what your job is.
Kicks in.
And being young helps, trust me.
Really?
If I had to do it now, some of the things I did when I was in the military, I think I'd have second.
Really?
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you...
Well, just flying every day,
Oh, I see.
going into battle every day.
I see, yeah.
You're taking troops into an area where the Viet Cong are down there, and they want to shoot you out of the sky. When they see a helicopter coming in with troops, all the guns turn to you. So, and that. Going in there, you're a target.
Yeah. Wow.
And many times we got calls. We had to go in and pull troops out that were in having, gun battles with the enemy, and they had to get out. They had to be evacuated out. So you knew you were flying into a
Right in
hot...
the middle of it, yeah.
Yeah, you're flying in.
How did you get the guys up, and you took them into the helicopter?
Yeah, we'd land right in the fields,
Okay.
right? And they'd come running, and they'd all just jump in, and the pilot would get out of there as quickly as he could.
How many guys would fit in the,
13, and you're crowded.
and so you weren't the only helicopter there?
Oh, no, hundreds. But on any mission,
Right.
there'd be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 helicopters. Some missions would be just 2. Depends on the type of mission you're on.
I see. So who's ever fighting down below, hopefully there's enough space in the plane, in the helicopters to...
Right, and sometimes 2 or 3 helicopters would go in,
Yeah.
sometimes 4 helicopters would go in. And sometimes the landing zones weren't cleared, you were in a jungle. So the pilots were great, they'd have to figure out how to get in there without hitting a tree. And then the other helicopter behind you, their nose would be right to your tail boom, and to try to squeeze in so they could all get in there to get the troops out or get the troops in. And a lot of times, a lot of the LZs, we call them LZs, landing zones, they were just fields, and they're elephant grass, very tall grass. And you didn't know if there were tree stumps down there or, anything, and you put the helicopter down, you could do some damage.
Wow.
So it was risky.
And was there sometimes nighttime?
Sometimes it was at night.
How do they
Not as
see?
much at night, though. Mostly during the day.
Oh, wow. Meanwhile, there's shooting going on from the enemy when you try to get the guys
Sometimes
out?
it depends on the mission. If you were out in there to do an extraction, where you're going in to extract troops out, sometimes you're going in under fire. If you were going in to deliver chickens up to another military installation, you didn't worry about being shot at.
Oh, I see.
Because
Depends.
the helicopter you had, the mission was different all
I
the
get
time.
it. Okay, wow. You went out every day?
Just about.
Wow.
Yeah, just about every day.
It sounds trivial to ask, but what kind of friendships and camaraderie did you form while you were over
A
there?
lot of friends, but the sad part is I'm older now, I'm 68, and I see so many faces, and I can't remember their names anymore, but I see their faces. And there was one guy, that his name was Carl also, and he was from California, and he and I became very, very good friends. I often wondered what happened to him, because I got transferred to another company at one point, I mentioned earlier, and he stayed behind, so I don't know what happened to him. And there were many other guys that I knew, and I see the faces, but I can't remember all their
Yeah.
names.
But when you were there, you were a cohesive group. I mean, people watched out for each other. You were
Yeah,
friendly.
yeah, especially the air crews. The air crews, you didn't fool around because we all relied on each other. I relied on the skill of the pilot. He relied on my knowledge of the airplane. He relied on us behind the guns. He relied on me if he or the co-pilot got shot, to be able to take us home. So it was, if we didn't all do our jobs and know them well, none of us were going home.
Wow.
So it was one of those things.
Real teamwork, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah.
How are you able to stay in touch with family and friends?
Letters,
Really?
just
You did?
letters.
And you got letters from home?
I got letters from home, and it was the most interesting thing because everybody, all you waited for all week was mail call, and you're standing there at a container. That's what it is, a container. These containers you see that they store things in behind supermarkets.
Right, big, huge.
A container, and double doors, and the mail room was inside the container, and the guy that took care of the mail, he had a little desk in there, and every night he'd open up the doors, and the whole company would gather around, and he'd read off the names of the mail that came in, and they'd all pass it back, and you waited and waited and waited for a letter.
Wow.
And then he would take your writings, your mail,
Oh, and then ship them out.
and go out, yeah.
So you said when you were off duty, you did go into town a little bit.
Yeah, we go into town a little bit. When I was up at Camp Evans, up in the Northern I Corps, there was no town around there. We were up in the boondocks. When I got relocated down to Fubai, to the gunship, the Cobra outfit, the city of Way, the imperial city of Way, was just outside of our compound. So it was easy to, if you had time off, you could go into Way
Oh.
a little bit, go into the PX. There was a PX in that area. You can go in there. You can go through town a little bit. You had to be careful.
I was going to ask you, yeah, did you?
Yeah, but they would secure areas. They would basically know that this area's been cleared and secured. It's not unsafe. Okay, take your gun, take your buddy, but it's relatively safe.
So was there any, so you didn't get injured or hospitalized while you were
I did get hospitalized. I didn't get injured.
Oh.
I actually came down with pneumonia. I came down with pneumonia when I was there, and they put me in the hospital. I was in the hospital for almost 2 weeks.
Really?
Yeah, almost 2 weeks.
Where were you then?
That's when I was up at Camp Evans, up on the Northern I Corps. And it was during monsoon season. And it was cold and it was rainy. And I came down with pneumonia. And they checked me out and they said, hey, you got a bad case of pneumonia. We're putting you in the hospital. The hospital was like a MASH outfit.
Oh,
That's what it was
jeez.
like MASH.
Wow.
Just like MASH. And the unfortunate thing was, most of the guys that were in my ward were infantry guys that had gotten wounded. And they were in there. And I felt terrible because I'm in there with pneumonia.
Yeah. Must have been, so 2 weeks until you
Yeah,
got-
about 2 weeks, yeah.
And then you went right back?
Right back to the same routine.
Wow, that was an American hospital?
It was a military hospital,
Military
an army hospital,
Yeah.
right on the compound.
Wow. So when your time was up, I mean, did they give you the option to re-up?
Yes.
Did you want to re-up?
I did.
You did?
I did only because they told me I was good at flying. While I crewed, I had to do a lot of flying because they wanted you to know how to fly. I told you it was a backup. It was a process of backup.
Right.
And I just loved it. I mean, I was a natural. And I knew from that point on, I want to be a pilot. That's what I want to do the rest of my life. And I wanted to fly helicopters. Well, I could have re-upped, and they would have sent me off to warrant officer training. And I could have gotten my wings, but I would have had to spend another 3 years in the military to do that. And I wanted to fly so bad. And they told me, Carl, you're good. We'll sponsor you. We'll get you into school. Okay. And I wanted to do that. But I said 3 years, I may be pushing my luck.
Really?
Yeah. So I didn't take that option. I came out.
Okay.
When I came out, I wanted to fly. That's what I wanted to do the rest of my life. I wanted to fly a helicopter. So I went to all these flight schools all over the country trying to, see and investigate how much,
This was like 1970?
This was like 1970, early 71 maybe.
Okay.
And they were telling me, we'll train you and it's going to cost you X, but you're never going to get a job.
Why?
Because Vietnam was putting out helicopter pilots by the thousands. And there's not a lot of helicopter jobs. How many police helicopters are there?
Right.
So they said, look, I'll be honest with you, we'll train you, we want your money, come to school, we'll teach you how to fly, but, the chances of you working in this occupation are pretty slim.
So what did you decide
I
to
went back to
do?
Grumman.
Oh, but did they hold your job for you?
They held my job, so I went back to Grumman.
Nice.
And I went back to riveting airplanes, which I didn't like.
You didn't?
No, I
What
didn't like
exactly is that?
Building airplanes, building. You've heard of Rosie the Riveter?
Yes, yes.
With a rivet gun in
Yeah,
their
yeah.
hands, and they're building the airplane. That's what I did.
Oh, I see.
So I went back to that, and I didn't like it. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be something. But I stayed in Grumman. I spent 28 years there.
Wow.
And I went to college at night, and I pulled myself up from being a riveter to when they shut down the company and closed manufacturing. I was a director of product operations. I was a director. So
Wow.
I had come quite a ways,
Yeah.
the director of the corporation. So I did come quite a ways.
And when Grumman closed, then what did you do?
I was out of work like all the other guys.
When was that? 90s?
1994, 5.
And so what did you do?
Well, I went back to school, and I started looking for a job. I went back to Stony Brook, and I brushed up on courses that I, wanted to take and things I wanted to do. I started sending resumes out, and AudioVox, I don't know if you've ever heard of AudioVox. It's a consumer electronics company in
Yeah.
Hauppauge.
Yeah.
They got my resume, and they picked me up. And I went in there as the national service manager for the corporation. And I've been there for 23 years, and now I'm the vice president.
Wow,
So,
fantastic. Good
yeah,
for you.
yeah,
Now, wait,
interesting.
you got married in the mix after you came
I got
home?
married after I came home.
How did you meet?
That didn't work.
Oh.
We got divorced.
Okay.
I remarried. And then with Grumman sent me to Iran.
Oh,
And I lived 4 years in Iran. My wife and I went to Iran.
Wow.
And I got relocated there, and they took care of us, and I was with the F-14 aircraft. You've heard of the
Yes.
F-14? They sent me there as a plane captain to Iran, and I was there for 4 years. And then the Shah fell, and the revolution took place, and we had to evacuate the country. And my daughter was born there.
oh, she was?
Yeah, so I had to send my wife and daughter out of the country before, and I stayed for another 30 days.
Wow.
And then they evacuated us out of Iran.
And you stayed with AudioVox?
And no, that's when I was with Grumman,
That's when you were growing?
with Grumman. Okay, so when I came back from the military, I went back to Grumman as a riveter, and I brought myself up, and and then I got on the F-14 program, and then they sent me to Iran with the F-14s.
Oh, okay.
Grumman did,
Okay.
and I was there for 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah, and then when I was there during the revolution, and my family, we had to evacuate the country.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you just feel less safe there than when you were in Vietnam? When that happened in Iran? I mean, wow.
It was kind of risky when we first got to Iran. They loved us. They couldn't do enough for us. But then the revolution started, and then the Iranians turned towards America. They turned against Americans. So we were a target. And then it started progressively getting worse. And in our housing complex that we lived in, we could hear the battles in the city, the tanks and the gunshots and the battles, and we could see the fires at a distance.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of fighting not far from where we were. And then the corporation said, Grumman said, look, maybe it's time to get the dependents out. Let's get the wives and children out, okay?
You had one daughter at that
I had
time?
one daughter, she was born there. Let's get them out, send them home. When things settle down, we'll bring them back, okay? So I sent my wife and daughter out, and I stayed. And it was only probably about 20 of us men, employees, that stayed. And then they started cutting our power off. And then the battles got closer and closer. And then the city that was right outside of our housing complex was the city of Isfahan. They overran that city. The revolution overtook the city. And then Grumman said, let's get everybody out. It's too risky. So they chartered an airplane to come out into the desert, land in the desert. They chartered a private corporate jet, a commercial jet, and they loaded us up in the desert, and we evacuated.
Just because it was safer there, or why in the desert? Oh, so-
Because the runways were out in the desert.
Oh, I see. Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
Wow. Then, so let's go back a step.
Right, to the military.
Yeah, when you left Vietnam, this is now backwards. How were you received by your family and friends?
Family were great. Friends, great. Strangers, not well. I think the most impact of coming back to Vietnam was my flight back. I think I landed I was in Seattle, Washington, and I was in Fort Lewis there. That was the receiving place for all the returning Vietnam vets. And I had to spend about a week there with paperwork and, processing out of the Army, because I was leaving the Army. When I came out, my time was up. I was actually leaving the Army.
Right.
So I was processing out, gave me tickets and said, okay, you're done. Congratulations, Carl. Thanks a lot for your service, and here's tickets, and go home and enjoy your family. And I remember getting on an airplane and landing someplace. I think I had to change flights somewhere. Don't remember where it was. And I landed like 11 o'clock at night, and I'm in my uniform, and I have my duffel bag. And I got off the airplane, and I got down to the next gate that I had to get on my next flight. And there was a woman there, a middle-aged woman, sitting there, dressed well, sitting there. And I sat down just next to her because I was looking for a seat. I sat down next to her with my duffel bag. And I wasn't aware of the political ramifications of Vietnam in the United States. And I'm sitting there, and she looked at me, and it was so off. She looked me up and down, and then she grabbed her stuff and got up and moved. And it was so obvious.
Terrible, yeah.
And I thought, I don't understand that. I don't, what did I do? Did I do something? Or,
Yeah.
you know, and in the military, one of the things they teach you is to respect civilians, you know. So I was shocked. I didn't quite understand it.
Did
And
you say anything?
No, I didn't say anything, and I didn't even give it too much more thought, because I thought, maybe she's just strange, or who knows, or maybe I frightened her. I didn't know. But then coming back, I realized after what I saw on television and what was going on, that it was not a politically correct war in this country, and what I experienced, what happened there is part of that experience.
Yeah, that was happening a lot.
Yeah.
How do you think your wartime experiences affected your life?
I think positive.
Yeah?
I don't regret anything. I don't regret Vietnam. I saw one of the most beautiful countries in the world.
Really?
I got to understand or meet Vietnamese people and their culture. And again, I was young, you know, and again, to me, this was National Geographic stuff you read in the magazines, okay? I got to really experience it firsthand. So to me, it was great. And it also took me in a further step into aviation.
Oh, right.
Okay? You know, I was riveting airplanes in Grumman, but now I'm flying helicopters.
Yeah.
And I'm 21 years, I'm 20 years old. This is the greatest thing in the world.
You learned a lot.
And I learned that that's what I wanted to do the rest of my life. You know, so I have no regrets. I have no regrets.
Was your daughter interested in did she join the military at all?
My daughter that was born there?
Yeah.
No, my daughter was born in Iran.
Iran, I mean.
Iran.
Yeah, right. No, I mean later on in life when she grew up.
No, she was young when we got her out of the country, when the revolution started. She was a year and a half old.
No, but I mean only because, you know, your dad had been and you
No,
were...
my daughter has, no. My daughter has no interest in the military.
Okay. What are some life lessons you learned from the military?
Life lessons. Wow. I shine my shoes. My shoes are always shiny.
Nice.
You know, I don't know. I've never really given it much thought.
Okay.
Life lessons.
How was it when you readjusted to civilian life? How was that?
It was a little tough.
Yeah.
It was a little tough. I think the reason I felt it was tough was I'm coming out of Vietnam. I'm so used to eating in the mess hall. I'm so used to being regimented. You know, coming back, it was like, do I fit in? You know, it was like, I don't know where I fit in anymore, you know?
Now, when you came back, you went back to live with your folks.
I went back to live with my parents,
yeah.
right? And I went back to work at Grumman.
Yes.
Right? And I knew I didn't want to work in Grumman riveting airplanes the rest of my life.
Right.
But I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I wasn't sure, should I go to college? So I did. I started going to school. I started going to college. I went to college at night.
Where?
So
What?
I started in Farmingdale, then I transferred to Nassau Community College.
Okay.
Got a degree in Nassau, and then I went and started doing some time in Hofstra. And so I was kind of, I think it was a shock, because I came back into the country, and I knew, okay, I knew what my job was in Vietnam, but now I've got to establish a career. I've got to do something. And I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I wanted to fly, but that was washed out because, you know. So I said, what do I do? So I started going to school at night. I finally got my degrees, and
In what?
a business. And I then wanted to, you know, better myself. But I was still riveting airplanes, okay? Well, funny thing is, they realized I was going to school, and they started moving me up in the company.
Great.
And I guess they recognized I was young, and I was self-educated myself, and, you know, and they put me actually on the fast track in Grumman, what we call the fast track. And at the age of 38, I was a director in the company.
Wow.
So I moved pretty good. They helped me move. But it was a shock. It was a shock transitioning back from the military into the private life, because you don't know where you fit in. You know, now you're not going to get a meal unless you work and get money to pay for it. You're not going to get a meal.
Right.
And what am I going to do to get that meal? How am I going to make money? What am I going to do as an occupation? I was kind of lost.
Right.
I wanted to fly, but that wasn't going to happen.
Right.
So what else was I going to do? And so that was a tough transition.
Were you able to, did you keep in touch with any of the guys you served with?
Funny story is about 5 years ago, I'm in my office and I had some time and I'm thinking, what happened to those guys in Vietnam that I flew with? What happened to them all? I can see their faces, the other pilots, the crew chiefs, the gunners. What happened to them? So I went online, I'm looking up the company that I was in, one of the divisions in the companies
yeah.
I was in, and I see there's a club of the company that I was in.
Wow.
So I contacted them, and they contacted me back.
Oh, great.
And I started talking to guys that I flew with.
Wow.
And they said, gee, what happened to you? What have you been doing? And what happened? And I said, what happened to this guy? And they were filling me in.
Nice.
And they had, a lot of them had stayed kind of together, and they had annual parties and meetings where they bring their families and their wives. And they wanted me to go, and I never did, but I did contact them. And in fact, one of the things I did was I said, does anybody know what happened to Lurch? Lurch was one of the pilots, and Lurch is one of the guys that taught me how to fly. And he looked like Lurch on the Addams Family or whatever. I don't know. He was a character. He was the nicest guy. But anyway, what happened to him? Nobody knows. We never heard from him. But one of the pilots I flew with, this guy, he was afraid of nothing. He was all of 21, maybe 22 years old, but nothing scared him. And he had developed multiple sclerosis, and he was in a wheelchair. And to know what he was, and to see him, that really got me.
I bet.
Yeah, it got me.
Wow. So, a couple of last questions. How do you think your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
Well, I don't like war. Nobody likes war. But I know from being around the world, and I've lived around the world, as I described, that sometimes it's necessary. And, I'm a true American. And it's taught me that the country comes, almost first, But, nobody likes it.
Right.
But sometimes it's do or die.
Has to be.
Yeah.
What message would you like to leave for future generations that might hear this interview?
Stop fighting. Really stop fighting. But, I've come to the conclusion the human is probably the most dangerous species. Animals kill to eat.
There's a reason.
Right. And I've learned that, and we don't learn as humans from the past. Look at World War II, look at the atrocities of World War II. You would think, we'd learn, but we don't.
No. Is there anything, Carl, we haven't discussed that you might like to add, anything that happened or anything you can think of we haven't touched on?
Well, a funny story.
Okay.
In Vietnam, I flew quite often on all these missions, and many times, like I said, you'd end up finding out when you got home at night that, you were under fire and you got holes in the helicopter, and you didn't see them, you didn't hear them because you just don't. But I got home one night from flying, and the commanding officer said, he saw me walking across the flight line, and he says, hey, Carl, would you do me a favor? I said, what's that? He says, we got a new water truck driver that just came in, and he's got to take the water truck, so that we have water on the base, down to the watering hole down Highway 1, and he's never been there. You know how to get there. And I said, yeah, I know where it is. He says, well, why don't you take a ride with him and show him how to get there? Do you mind? I said, no, I'll get in. So I got in the passenger side of this big water truck, and I'm sitting there, and this guy had maybe been in the country maybe a week or, and we're driving along, and I said to the guy, I said, now look, I had my rifle, my M16, and I said to him, now look, we're going right through some villages. We're not heroes, okay? We're gonna, if you hear some popping or anything, you just step on it. Let's be careful. No sooner did I get that out of my mouth, all of a sudden we hear we're coming out of the jungle on the sides of the road.
Brush, yeah.
We hear pop, 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 right? Well, I jumped down on the floorboard, and I'm yelling to him, step on it, let's get out of here, right? And he's yelling at me, get your gun and shoot, go get your... I said, listen, these guys are already mad enough, that's why they're shooting at us. Let's just get out of here.
Yeah.
This is not a planned So we did. So the point is, and when we got back, the water truck was all shot up. And so I guess the part, and the reason I'm telling the story is, that's the closest I really realized I was in danger. You know, flying in a mission with all that's going on, the excitement of an extraction, and you're firing your gun and you're trying to get people in there, and the enemy's shooting at you, but you don't see it, you don't hear it
I see.
until you get home at night. You know, you realize what happened. So that was,
But this, you were right in the middle of it.
I'm going to get water in the water truck,
Yeah.
right? You know, and yeah, so there was some Viet Cong or somebody in the wood, and they saw the truck going by, and they took some pot shots at us. So.
So he just gunned it and you got away?
He gunned it, but he wanted him to get out and fight, and I said, no,
And
let's
there
go.
was nobody else with you?
No, just the two of us.
Oh, God.
Yeah,
Well, I'm glad you made it out.
yeah. But,
Jeez.
you know, at the time, you know, we laughed about it, but,
Oh,
you know, because you're young.
Yeah,
You know, but
yeah.
now, you know.
wow. Well, Carl, thank you. I really appreciate your sharing all your stories with us.
I hope it
thank you
wasn't
for your-
boring.
Not at all.
Okay.
Thank you for your service.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right.